everybody. Welcome to the Fire It Up with CJ show. I have Swami Khecaranatha here, and we are talking about the heart of consciousness and talking to him about the heart uh, and love and all of that. So welcome, welcome, and I'm going to refer to you as Nathaji for folks who
Thank you.
do different
Happy to
names.
be here.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about what is the Heart of Consciousness. I know that you just changed the name of your organization to the Heart of Consciousness. Tell me a little bit about what prompted that and what it means.
Well, I think primarily it was just over the last couple of years uh, a, a a fundamental shift in my teaching, and not that I always have focused on the heart, but really trying to really more specifically express that our our lives is the basically the, due to the heart of consciousness, the heartbeat of God, if you will, the heartbeat of that pure consciousness. And in that coming to understand that in ourselves, then we understand that all of our sadhana, all of our spiritual practice is the search for ourselves inside God's heart.
Mm,
And really the discovery of God in our hearts. And
mm,
so that heart of consciousness is really describing the kind of the the ultimate, the highest recognition is that there is simply that pure consciousness, God consciousness, Shiva consciousness, whatever the term that people like best, right? That all of life, everything is that consciousness, and that all of manifestation is the expression, the creative expression of that consciousness.
mm,
And
mm,
that the way we ultimately come to that experience is by feeling our own heart, feeling the heart chakra, but feeling the center of our individuated consciousness, and and centering and aligning ourselves in that, and then allowing that awareness that is immanent within that to reveal itself.
mm,
And so it is really the kind of uh, the progression of our sadhana, the progression of our spiritual practice from the immature stages of it, if you will, to the mature stages of it, where we recognize that pure awareness from which are being expressed, that the pathway to that experience is through our own heart, then finding our own heart and really living there and living in that spacious, simple openness, merging that with God's heart, if you will, and then recognizing that we are simply that heart, right?
mm,
So that heart, consciousness is the heart of it all.
mm.
So just for me, I wanted to more correctly or succinctly name my practice and our organization to be more focused on that. Right.
So our own heart, our own ability to access within that place within ourselves starts in our heart then?
Yes, yes, because the what we're looking for is consciousness. We're looking to understand consciousness as the source of ourselves, as the source of all of life, right? And that happens because we can turn our awareness inside, right? We can center ourselves in the simple core of our own consciousness, and the direct access to that is through our own heart, the heart chakra, right?
Mm,
and and that we can then open our hearts and stay centered in our hearts, and then allow our practice to evolve, to mature from that, right? And the that heart is for us, it's the uh, we can think of our own heart as the immanent heart of consciousness, the immanent heart of God that we feel in ourselves, that we can then center into and expand into that transcendent heart, which is God's heart, right?
Mm. Mm.
And then God's heart becomes immanent in us.
Mm. So we have to first, because a lot of your meditations and the practices focus on the heart. So once we can actually find our own consciousness, the heart of consciousness within ourselves, we can actually then tune into the greater heart of consciousness. It was there all along, but that somehow we didn't recognize.
Exactly. You can think of our heart as the doorway into that
Mm-hmm.
realm of consciousness. The heart is also, and particularly in our practice, in my teachings, the doorway into the of how we enter into the inner mechanism, the psychic body. So we can draw all of our awareness, all of the energy of our life back into the heart, and we can channel it through our mechanism, and ultimately so that it channel and rises back through the central channel, the Sushumna, right?
Mm.
So it's at once the center of awareness and also the doorway into the pathway to awareness, which is energy or Shakti, or our own
Mm-hmm.
central channel within us.
So there are some practices, there's a lot of different practices. Some focus on the third eye, some focus on the crown chakra, some focus on the sex. I mean, they're all different types of
Right.
chakras that could be a potential entryway. And as you mentioned, the heart chakra is leading you to the Sushumna, which is the energy center, the core that runs throughout our whole body. So
Correct.
could there be many access points aside from the heart, and why the heart versus the third eye or the crown or other things that people focus on?
Well, I would say the left ear can be an access point, right?
Okay, yeah.
In the sense that what we're trying to do is to come in contact with that energy and that awareness that not only is already in us, it is us, right? But the heart is where we feel that simple joy, where we feel love, where we feel gratitude, right? And so uh, we start with the heart, and it doesn't mean that we end there. But what I want to suggest is that we find our own heart, we find that in our own individual heart, and as we can fall into that awareness, then we realize that is the same heart as God's heart. That is the
Mm,
universal heart, right?
mm-hmm.
Now, there's lots of things that happen in between those two moments. In a sense, we do our sadhana, we channel the energy inside. We're attempting to raise the kundalini, right, which ascends through the central channel, right? And all of that is the purification of that central channel, right? And ultimately, the chakras are not what's important. Ultimately, it is the flow of energy and the inner current within the Sushumna that is the pathway to consciousness, right?
Mm,
So as we cultivate our capacity to be very still and in a state of deep surrender and in palpable contact with that with that Kundalini force in us, then that leads back to where it originated from, which is God, which is consciousness, which I call the heart of consciousness, right? And so, there's all kinds of levels of practice that I give in terms related to the heart, you know, starting from just a simple breathing exercise of following your breath and becoming aware of the breath, but aware of the breath as it arises and subsides, not from the lungs, but from the heart, right?
mm,
Right?
mm,
But then, you can mature from that to breathing into the heart and then letting go and allowing your awareness and that energy to rise through the center of the head to the top and out, right? But that's I won't say it's necessarily a more advanced practice, but so the point is the heart, from my perspective, is the entryway into our inner life. It is the entryway into being inside ourselves, right?
mm-hmm.
And so that's why I focus on the heart.
Right.
And I will also say that the moment I met my teacher, the heart that I didn't know I had exploded, right? And my entire practice, with all of the different iterations and the different add-ons and stuff that happens through the last 48 years, has been focusing on living in the heart.
Mm. So it's based on your personal experience, and is it also a Shaivite practice to focus on the heart, or is it most like this is, they're all different types of teachers that focus on different areas, or is this the specific your brand of
No,
reaching?
well, I mean, maybe it's a little bit of both. Yes, the non-dual Shaivite traditions talk often about the heart, right? Uh, Abhinavagupta, who is one of the greatest Shaivite masters, you know, many times talks about the heart and its passageway. He calls it the Immaculate Heart, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, it's at once an ancient uh, experience that people in ancient days, these sadhus in ancient days, experienced the same thing. They just closed their eyes and looked inside, and what they found was their own heart, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then they followed that experience and allowed that to expand, right? To uh, allow a revelation that their heart is not just the same as God's heart; it is God's heart.
Mm. So I want to go back to, and you've told this story many times, but I just want, and I know it's been, I'm sure you remember, but at the moment that so tell us again. I feel like a little kid going to, tell me the story again about how you met Rudanandra, and I want to understand like what happened to you felt like your heart just exploded, opened up, like what happened at that moment when you actually physically met him? What was the experiential sense on the inside for you when you met your teacher, Rudanandra?
Well, uh, perhaps the most succinct way I can describe it is that I sat down in a room with Rudy, in a meditation room, and there were many other people who were there. And our tradition, we use what we call open eyes class, an open eyes transmission of Shakti. So I was sitting there in meditation, and Rudy comes in. He sits on the teaching stand in front of everybody. He opened his eyes. I opened my eyes, and uh, my heart, all of a sudden there was an opening in me, right? There was a freedom in me. There was a sense of joy and love that just showed up. It just opened up, and it was a palpable sense. This is my heart right here. I can
Right,
feel this in my body, even though it wasn't the body, right?
right.
And so then, I can describe all the light that happened and this and that, and in a sense, the messages that happened.
Yeah.
But really, what happened was just my own awareness. What happened in that moment of Shakti transmission is that infused, activated, gave energy to this heart and mind that maybe was a little rusty and that just opened up and blossomed, right?
Mm. So it was just an immediate, that intense. And was it an energy or was it just everything, the energy and a felt sense of like, did you pass out or did you just
Uh,
feel like a sense of opening? Were you shaking? Were you foaming at the mouth? I mean, what
well,
happened?
I hope I wasn't foaming at the mouth, but there's a pregnant openness, right? And that pregnancy is the vitality of that openness, the energy of that openness, right? But it's not just an energy. I mean, yes, in Shakti transmission, you're transmitting a powerful force, and some people have kriyas, emotional, mental, physical movement, you know, and so all that's part of it. But that's just the fluff, in a sense. That's just kind of what happens to your body as your own inner being wakes up, right?
Mm.
And shows, and the vitality of that pure awareness in you just radiates out and fills you and fills every cell of you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And every person has a different experience.
Mm.
I just came back from Phoenix. I have a lovely student there who is a great hatha yoga teacher, and so she asked me to come do a program, a day and a half program with all
Mm-hmm.
her yoga students, and many of them had not meditated before. I'd say many of them, and many of them had not focused on the heart. And I'd say the predominant experience for all of them was that sense of heart, was that sense of their heart opening and some clarity of insight, some wish, some longing that somehow surfaced just by being in that in that class in that weekend, right? So everybody will experience it a different thing. Some people may just have pure insight. I am not who I thought I was. I'm not my body. Right. I am the universe. Right. You
Right.
know. But the most extraordinary experience, I think, is the simple essence of knowing ourselves.
Mm. And so just the mere presence of Rudy was somehow, I guess, it was, do you view it as he was the vehicle for you to be graced by God or Shiva? Or how,
It works slightly different than this.
okay.
And this is an important point. A lot of people, you may hear people talking about gurus or teachers giving Shaktipat, right? Well, that's not exactly what happens. Only God gives Shaktipat. God
Mm,
means descent of grace. And it is
mm,
God's grace that descends, awakens in us that longing to know Him, right?
mm,
It
mm-hmm,
is God wanting to know Himself as us, right?
mm-hmm,
Right? Or in us, right? Simultaneous from that moment when that grace happens, that experience for me happened a year before I met Rudy. I didn't
mm,
know that it was called grace, et cetera, et cetera. But you heard my story. I heard about Rudy a year later. I went through all these different this thing, moved there, and finally I met him. When that grace descends, two things happen. That longing is the light of that heart is lit up. That longing happens. I want to know God. I want to know myself. I want to know my highest nature. At the same time, excuse me, the it compels us to find the nourishment, to find the energy source to fuel that longing. That
mm,
source
mm-hmm,
is called a teacher. To
mm-hmm,
find the Shakti to give us the energy to discover the source of that longing, which is our own heart, which right. So that Shaktipat, that descent of grace, simultaneous, the longing shows up, and the wish, the need, the understanding. I need a teacher. I need love. I need nourishment. I need an energy source to fuel this longing, so that it can expand and reveal itself to me.
mm.
Right. That's God's way of saying, I'm trying to reveal myself to you. You just need a little extra juice in the process.
Ah, okay. So the teacher is, and so I'm thinking about Rudy, who basically had a like yourself, like not a really long period of time. You didn't have a long period of time with Rudy, and Rudy similarly didn't have a long time with Nityananda. So how is that juice conveyed, and so that it's like a ongoing relationship? Is there a period in which like I'm going to convey as much juice as I can, and then after Rudy passed, so he wasn't around for him to convey that sort of
Well,
energy?
again, it's a little bit of both because uh, I knew Rudy for 18 months. It was like being with him for 20 years,
Hmm.
but and he certainly transmitted a lot of Shakti in those 18 months. But it's the moment that transmission takes place, that energy connection is created. It is ever present after that, right? Whether you're with the person physically or not with the person physically. As I told you, Rudy died in a light plane crash 18 months after I met him. Uh, except for the first 30 seconds when I found out he had passed away, when that connection didn't seem to be there. 30 seconds later, when I realized my teacher is free, then he became more present than he was in real life, in physical life, and that presence is the same today, if not greater than it was then. So
Hmm.
that presence, that connection is not has ultimately has nothing to do with whether the physical body or whether the physical body remains or doesn't remain. You hear many people talk about their experiences with their spiritual teacher that maybe they met him once and that they're ever present. Maybe they lived with them for a long time and then they didn't, but they're ever present, right?
So,
The
so
whole
you,
point of the teacher is to create for us to help us establish our own connection to our own Shakti, that in the sense that Shakti that is our connection back to God. So the teacher is simply a conduit,
right.
right?
To say, here's now, so let me see if I can understand this. So you had 18 months in which you're like, see, this is your connection to God. See, I'm going to remind you, I'm going to remind you, I'm going to remind you. And then
Well,
it's
and
like
also, if you
profound.
will, kind of doing the wiring, helping
Right.
to rewire the system so that that connection could be sustained.
Ah, okay. So then the connection was sustained over that 18-month period, and then but was cemented enough so that when he passed, it was still there. It's not that something left. It was that that energy connection was still
Of
there.
course, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that connection with him never left, and that ever-present connection to our own source is always present within us. And
Mm.
so all the teacher is really doing is activating our capacity to be in touch with that ever-present connection.
Mm. And then you've mentioned this a couple of times is that you said there was, and I didn't realize there's only 30 seconds between the time that he died. Oh, I've lost the connection to the, oh my gosh, it's free. I thought maybe that happened over a 2 week period, but it happened within a 1 minute period, which is just shocking to me. So in
Well,
that, yeah.
because he left New York to fly up to upstate New York about 6 o'clock. He was supposed to get there by 7. By about 11 o'clock, he hadn't showed up there. We kind of were figuring out what had happened. It's about 1 o'clock in the morning as I'm sitting in meditation. I mean, it was just, I got the email. Rudy's, you know, there was no
Literally an email.
no,
Okay.
the email here, the message, Rudy has passed, right?
Oh,
And
wow.
in that moment, then everything in me just collapsed. Everything in me, my heart shut, my heart, everything just collapsed. And by God's grace, by His grace, somehow in the middle of that, I was able to just take a breath, and all of a sudden, the truth really showed itself. Wait a minute. This is what your teacher has been working for. He's free. How can you be sad about the joy of his own freedom? And so that 30 seconds felt like an eternity. But
Wow.
through I'm enormously grateful, because I could have gone into a tailspin for years. You hear about it all the time, and where people lose their teacher and they lose faith, they lose this, they lose that. So look, I was 21 years old.
Mm.
It wasn't because of my great, maturity and advancement that I was able to just tune into that. It was just more of God's grace, you
Right. So
know.
more God's grace came and said he's free. And when you say that he's free of what? And why was that what he was looking for the whole time?
Well, he was looking for the only purpose of our spiritual practice is liberation, to know and live in God. And there's no body required for that, and nor body that's there, right?
Right. So he was liberated from the physical body, and therefore there was a different version of a freedom and liberation that he had, or why
Well,
would
of course, yes, because within our tradition, then many traditions talk about that liberation only can happen after the falling of the body,
right,
right? Non-dual tantric traditions talk about what's called Jivan Mukti, freedom while alive,
right,
freedom while embodied,
right,
meaning I've got a body, I'm walking around, I'm doing the dishes, taking out the garbage, and I live in a state of absolute freedom.
right.
Yeah.
So he was free, but based on the traditional, it's always kind of confused me. I'm like, wasn't he free already? So when he left the
Yes,
physical
but
form,
but but the whole goal is freedom from transmigration, freedom from another life, physically.
okay, okay,
Yeah.
so yeah, okay, got it. So A freedom. So, do you think at that point that he's not going to be reincarnated again in the flesh, incarnated? Is that what you mean by
Uh,
freedom from
uh,
transmigration?
yes, yes, that is my belief, that that's the experience that Rudy will
Ah,
have.
okay, so he may be like an ascended or like he's going to the next realm of
Well, and let's
mastering.
just hope he's just playing poker with God.
Okay. All right, so I want to go to the experience that you had in that 30 second of, oh my gosh, when you describe your heart closing down, because I just came back from the retreat in Hawaii with you, and my heart was just complete. I've never, when people talk about being blissed out, I had no idea what they meant until I spent 1 week in Hawaii. And as I told you when we were in Hawaii, I've never been so pissed off, angry, and upset, and then totally blissed out simultaneously within the same week's period. I mean, it was quite a phenomenon to experience that. But in the end, at the very end, my heart was completely open. At least, who knows if it was completely open. It felt very, very open relative to
Open
my
is
normal
open.
states. What?
Open is open.
Yeah, it felt open, and then I went home, and I was still open, and then I met with this person who I just met, and I wasn't consciously thinking, but my heart, if your heart is like a flower, I just noticed that like the petals just started
Right,
closing, and I
right.
thought, well, that's fascinating, just the presence of this person, and my heart closed, and it was interesting to notice like my heart closing, and then but it didn't feel safe to really open back up. And so you had this graceful experience where your heart started closing. I don't know if it felt like this, but at least this is how my heart feels when it
Right.
closes. And then you were given the grace by Rudy, whomever, who knows at that time, but you were given a grace to go, no, he's free. Like, this is great. So what do those who aren't graced at that moment, that when they feel the closing, is there some benefit for closing the heart, the protection of the heart? You're shaking your head. No. So give me your perspective of when your heart closes down. What is another way of working with it so that you are still in a place of love, but also protection? Or is there even the notion of needing to be protected?
Well, I would say not exactly. Look, that the contraction happens not exactly that the heart contracts, but our awareness contracts, and it contracts because of all our mental and emotional construct, right? And so that becomes so heavy that it closes in on that light of the heart, right? It's like throwing a blanket over a candle, right?
Mm.
Right. So it that the contraction doesn't happen in the heart. The heart is a state of pure openness, right?
Mm.
And that's why even in your describing your own experience, you're all pissed off and calling me names behind my back and everything during the retreat, right?
I was not calling you. I was calling other people. I was actually more punitive to myself. That was the interesting thing.
Call it yourself. My point was, right, but then all of a sudden you discovered that openness, right? Well, how did you get from being pissed off and angry and frustrated and all that stuff to open? The open was always there. What happened was that you got deeper than that, than the mind, deeper than the emotions, right? And so then that candle was always there, right? That light was always there. So when you find yourself contracting, it's because you've allowed some interaction with yourself or with another person and you're deciphering that experience through your mind and through your emotions, right? And then we somehow allow, quote, those conditions to contract us. And so then our awareness contracts, which may feel like it's our heart contracting.
Okay, so let me go through the thought construct that has run through my head, and that is in the general. If you travel around in spiritual circles, there's this general, hey, there are people who are energy vampires. There are people who have bad energy. There are people who are dabbling in the dark. Of which this person that I saw, that thought construct, whoop, like just popped up in my
Right.
head. This is someone who is all those particular thought constructs popped up into my head. So here's a
Well,
thought construct. And,
yeah.
and what does
And
one
that, look,
do?
Well, that may be correct that there are people who, you know, play on the dark side, if you will, and try to steal other people's energies, etc. You know, but uh, the only they can only take your heart from you or your energy from you if you give it to them.
Well, what does that look like? I mean, if you, so you're,
Meaning you stay centered in yourself, you stay open, right? You don't have to engage in the fear that they're trying to take something from you because that's just you giving it to them, right?
mm-hmm.
You're aware, and look, why stay in a room with somebody who's trying to steal, you know, if they're trying to steal your blackberry pie, then you would take your blackberry pie and leave, right?
But then in the spiritual world, there's infinite blackberry pie. So
Yes.
but the blackberry pie doesn't even exist. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
so
So what's I can't I'm trying to reconcile the logic or maybe the theories. I'm supposed to have infinite energy, love, capacity if I have this open. So why can't he take the blackberry pie?
you can, you can give it to them, right? The point is, what's the fear? So much of the time we come in contact with a situation and we get fearful. What are we fearful? They're going to take something from us,
Right.
right? Or
Right.
they're going to give us something we don't want. They can't take anything from you that you don't want to give them, right? They certainly can't take your core pure consciousness being, right? You don't have to take their vampire energy awareness into you if you don't want to, right? So in that state of openness, we're aware, we're alert, and we have a discriminating capacity to say, yeah, this is a dark energy. I don't want to engage in this. I don't want to feed this. I don't want to take from it. But you can only do that when you're centered in yourself, right? If you somehow get pulled out of yourself or
Okay.
outside of yourself, then you've lost your own center. Right?
Okay. So it's the minute that the thought comes up, oh, energy vampire, he's taking my blackberry pie or whatever,
Right.
that kind of like all of a sudden these thoughts pump up, I have this beautiful light and I just threw a blanket on top of it. That's really it's before the blanket even gets thrown on top of it, you're saying is, oh wait, thought he's an energy
Yeah.
vampire, he's gonna come and he's dabbling in the dark arts, blah 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 blah
Yeah,
blah.
and that may be true, but that doesn't mean you have to engage that particular energy field, right? Even if they're in the room with you, you remain center, right?
So
You know,
what does that look like? So I'm like,
well, here's a good
Nathaji, blah
example.
blah blah. I don't like I didn't like this meditation retreat. Nothing happened to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
Right. That's
so what
that's
happens to
mine.
you?
So here's an example I always use. You know, I love to play tennis, right? And
Yes.
my hero is Federer, right?
Okay.
Roger Federer. If you watch him hit his stroke, when he hits the ball, his eye is on the ball. He strokes the ball. His head is never moved. The ball hits the court and he lifts his head, right? He's still, right? He knows exactly what he's doing. He knows where the ball's going to go without having to look, right? He's in his center. He's in that place of stillness. The energy's moving, the ball's back and forth or whatever, right? So it's that place of stillness in ourselves, that place of centeredness in ourselves, that energies come and go. We don't have to do anything with them or not do anything with them, right? And if we choose to do something with them, then we consciously channel, digest those energies and channel them through our system, right? But if we're not capable of doing that, then we shouldn't be trying to do it. But in our own state of stillness, in our own center, nothing can come into you that you don't want to come into you. Nothing.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
nothing can be taken from you.
It's when we go outside of our center.
Yes,
That's when
exactly.
actually
Exactly.
we oh my gosh, whatever. He took
Yeah,
my
the fear, the
blackberry
this,
pie.
that,
Call the
and
police.
that center is the heart of consciousness.
Ah,
That center
okay.
is your heart.
Okay. Okay. That helps a lot. Okay, so I'm going to go back to some of the technical pieces that I've always been curious about too. So, we talked about, so there are many gateways. You talk about the
Hmm.
gateway to your heart as being probably the easiest to access because that's where your own heart of consciousness resides. But there are other parts. There's the third eye. There's the crown. Um, why the emphasis on these two parts, connecting these parts, versus, let's say, your second chakra or your third chakra or your first chakra, and there seems to be some emphasis in your meditations about the first chakra, but the second and third seem to be relatively ignored, as well as the fifth. What's the emphasis on the first chakra, the third eye chakra, and the crown chakra?
Well, the emphasis of bringing our awareness and the energy to the base of the spine is that we're trying to take all of our energy, all of our life force, right? All of this energy that we've got projected outside of us and internalize it and bringing it to the base of the spine, and so that it can, if you will, re-enter, that it can be channeled through the central channel, right? Because that Kundalini lies at the depth of ourselves, right, in the base of us, not exactly in the base of the spine, but in the core of us, right? And its pathway for ascent is the central channel, right?
So you're trying to
So,
get to the first, that, or you call sex, but the first chakra is really where the energy kind of emanates from, the coil that they talk
well, the
about. The
base of the
coil.
spine, the
Yeah, the base of the
Muladhara,
spine.
right?
Okay, so
Right.
that's why I get that as the emphasis, because you're trying to, like, that's the propellant. You're like turning the Bunsen burner on.
Well, yeah, you're bringing the energy down so that it can then cycle back up through the Sushumna, right?
Okay.
Right. And then as you learn to create that inner flow within yourself and open that channel, that pathway, then that Kundalini Shakti, which is your essence, right? We are Kundalini Shakti, right? And liberation through Kundalini meditation practice is the ascent of that Kundalini back to its source, which happens because we can open the center of our head, we can open the crown, right? And we can allow that energy to rise back, to the cosmos, back to that pure consciousness that's not outside our body, but not inside our body, right?
I see. So it's almost like you're focusing on the top and the bottom, mostly so that you can,
You can
going
think of
back
it
to,
like that,
yeah, because
yeah.
you were talking about the
Nityananda once
flow.
described it as being like dropping a bucket into the well and letting it drop all the way to the bottom and then lifting it up to the surface. And the
Mm,
surface is here, right?
okay, got it.
But it's the center of the head, it's not the third eye,
Oh, it's the
right? People
center
get
of the
all
head. Okay,
the
so,
center of the head
but why the center of the head and not the top? Is
because
there?
that because well, it's the center of the head and the crown, right?
Hmm.
So that's two different spaces,
Right,
right? And then, as you know, I teach a space that's 12 inches above the head
right,
called Svadhisthana, right?
right.
Nityananda called the heart, the center of the head, the crown, and probably the space above the crown as the heart space.
Hmm.
And so we can feel our heart, we can feel the center of the head, we can feel the crown. It's when that becomes one space, that's what he called the heart space. And okay, these are chakras of higher awareness if you think of it like that.
Okay. So he refers to them as a heart space because it's this higher awareness that he's
That is the
referring to.
heart of consciousness, right?
Okay. Okay. So,
We all know what the sex chakra is all about.
right, right, which is not
Sex.
necessarily about that, or the second. Why not the throat? Why not the chakra in the throat?
Because look, yeah, some systems talk about 5 chakras, some talk about 7, some talk about 13. I saw this diagram the other day. We're talking about 26 chakras. These people had too much time on their hands. No Facebook, no internet, right? As, at some point, the chakras are not what's important.
Right,
It
the
is
flow of
the
energy.
pathway for the energy to rise and reunite with its source, which is consciousness.
Okay. All right.
So the throat chakra is, people want to get all caught up in the chakras, this color and the meaning is in this one and the meaning's in that. Why bother? They're like railway stations. I want to go to Seattle on the train station. I don't want to stop in every podunk town along the way.
Right.
I want the express.
Right. Well, unless you want to travel. I mean, I guess
Well,
my guess. I mean, I don't know. I think that the people,
look,
well, I don't know. They say that for people who focus, I've interviewed folks that focus on the chakras, and it's because there's wisdom, energy, and in Tacoma and in Vancouver.
I've been to Tacoma. There's no energy. consciousness there. Excuse me, all you people in Tacoma. Look, of course, but here's the thing, right? So you stop in Tacoma and you get a nice hot dog,
Right.
right? Right? You missed the train to get back on when the gourmet meal was in Seattle,
Okay, fair enough.
right?
Okay, I get it. It's like you can get very lost in these stops, these like little sundry stops along the way from where you are
Because
now all the way to
yeah,
this
look,
higher
here's the
state of
thing.
being. I get
Yeah.
it.
Everybody wants to get caught up in the content. Let's get to the place where there's no content, where there's just absolute fullness, complete in itself. No drama, no content, no story, just simple, pure fullness.
So no angels, no guides, no Metatron. All these other.
Uh, I haven't used any of them, and I've done okay.
Okay, so all right, I have a question for you. So, stillness. You talk about a still point. Um, where in one of the meditations you talk about the still point in your heart. I've
Hmm.
heard different things. I've heard some the still point is the space in between the in breath and the out breath. In your practice, what is the still point and where is it located, or does it even matter to know?
Well, look, the still point is the intersection between 2 points,
Okay.
right? It's the intersection between the arising breath and the subsiding breath, right? It's the intersection between our heart and God's heart.
Uh,
That still point is stillness, right? And so it's correct to use a breathing, exercise to focus on the breath and find the center, of the breath, right? Then you find the breath inside the breath, right? Or to feel the center of your head and feel an absolute size of a sesame seed still point in the center of your head,
mhm.
right? Et cetera, et cetera. So, the point about still point is we're bringing ourselves into stillness.
Hmm.
So it doesn't exactly make a difference where the still point is anywhere you find it in
Right.
that sense.
It's the intersection between your consciousness and God's consciousness, which can be
That let's say that's a pretty gigantic still point, right?
right.
That space I talk about above the head, Dwadashanta, is accessed as a still point, as a singular point, and it opens into dimensionless awareness.
Okay. So then when you're focusing on the still point, there's some of your meditations that talk about dropping into the still point,
Right.
or what does that mean? What are you dropping? When I think of
Well,
it, is it dropping
go
down the
ahead.
well, or what is it that you're dropping?
Well, and that no dropping down the well would be in a sense dropping down and gathering the energy and lifting it up, right? So when we talk about a still point, we're talking about think of it simply as it's the still point, the center of your own awareness, wherever that is, right? Even your thoughts, right? There's a still point between one thought and the next thought, right?
Hmm.
There's a still point as a thought starts to arise, right? There's a whole tradition, non-dual tradition called Spanda, right?
Hmm.
Their entire focus is on that still point. And so when a thought starts to arise, we can be aware of the thought before it rises, just as it starts to arise, and we can allow it to rise and subside, staying in that still point. And then what happens? The thought is like a cloud. It's like a wave on the ocean. Our energy doesn't get caught in it, etc. Right? So in
Okay,
your
so it's like
practice,
it's about erasing all the content then. It's whether it's the still
it's,
point
it's
and
yes, yes. You can think of it like that. It's not even erasing. It's just finding that still point out of which content arises and subsides.
right.
That's
Okay.
why, when I said earlier, you can focus on the heart and follow the breath and become aware of the pulse of just by following the breath, then you can become aware of the pulsation of that breath in your heart chakra, right?
Hmm.
And then you become aware that pulsation is really just the heartbeat of your own consciousness, right? So you can follow each still point, if you will, to a deeper still point, right?
Okay, I'm far away from that even still point, let alone deeper still point. But I think, but I'm
okay. That's okay.
Yes, you're
But
saying
you
there's.
know, if you don't look for a still point, then we're just babbling fools, and you know, all this stuff goes on. You have to become still, and that's really the subtlety of consciousness, to find that still point, whether you're looking for in your heart or the center of the head or wherever, right? That means becoming very, very still, withdrawing our senses, withdrawing thought, withdrawing emotions, and becoming singularly focused.
Hmm. And so when you were actually going and doing these transmissions, is all you're focusing on that still point and you're just like a light bulb emanating energy, or are you just completely?
I would say that's one of the things that's happening.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'm
Yeah.
sure the rest of it is the secret sauce, but I'm just
Yeah.
curious.
Exactly. Yeah.
But that is maybe that is the one of the key things to
Well,
actually
we
being
can
that
say
still.
it like this: the more still I am, the greater God's voice speaks.
Got it. Got it.
Whether that's spoken in words or in Shakti or consciousness, right?
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. So thank you
The
so
last
much.
thing I'll say about
Yes.
stillness and surrender are the same. We surrender to become still. We get still to find that state of surrender.
Hmm.
That state of
Interesting.
surrender.
So yeah, so there's a point of which like surrender is just like giving up my I see. I have just such a different notion of surrender. I didn't think of it as that. Say it again. Say it again for a part of me
Well,
that just went, "What?"
I said surrender and stillness are the same. We surrender in order to find that stillness in ourselves. We
Mm-hmm.
get still in order to find that state of surrender in ourselves.
Mm.
Then it's not about surrendering something, even surrendering ourselves. It is a state of awareness. It's a state of unconditionality.
Mm.
That's what stillness is, and that's what surrender is.
And on your journey and going deeper and deeper and finding that point of stillness in yourself, what would you say has been the difference in your day-to-day experience?
The difference is that you're less and less identified with yourself and more identified with God.
Hmm.
And that's a palpable experience. And at some point, look, this is not about having some experience, oh, I feel God over there, I felt God there. It is about the absolute direct experience and revelation that pure consciousness is you. You are God walking.
Hmm.
And you live from God's heart, not from your own anymore. Your own heart has been absorbed back into God's heart.
So when your own heart, I'm just going to keep on chasing this Nathaji. So when
Okay.
your own heart is absorbed by God and you realize that you are God, what is that like? Like you wake up in the morning, you're like, I am God. Like I mean, what what is your day to day
Oh, you
experience
still get
like?
up, go to work, do the dishes, you know, do your ablutions, do whatever. You still live, but your whole awareness is is from a whole different place in yourself, right? And the most important thing to understand is that your sense of self-absorption, of self-identity, has been dissolved.
So that means someone you miss your backhand, and so is that so? Or I know that you
So
said that like
let's be really clear. I'm completely still everywhere except on the tennis court. Then
okay.
I scream and holler and throw my racket.
Okay, so let's erase that part.
Right.
But someone comes in and it's like, I didn't get anything from that Arizona retreat. Nah, you're
Right. Right.
like whatever. Um, and so when you're walking as God, and you realize that you are God, and what how's that experience changed? Do you just are you sending love to that person? What happens to
Well,
you?
what else would you send them? Right? There's no judgment. There's no this. There's no that. There's only that simple joy of life that you're sharing, and have compassion for the person. You give them a refund if they want, but but look, it's not that you still, people around you still have maybe a difficult experience, and you're able to do that, but you're able to not engage in at that level, but to simply love them without condition,
Mm.
right? And nourish that part of them that can receive that.
Mm. All right, so the last question is, you talk about in your tradition there is three different stages of, Navapaya, Shaktapaya, and then no,
Yes, Anabapaya, Shaktapaya,
Shaktapaya, and then
Shambhavapaya.
Shambhavapaya, and then there's the one beyond that.
Right.
Are you in that stage, a four stage, or where would you put yourself? Well, I'm assuming you're not on this other continuum, but where are you on the continuum? Is it a continuum? How does even oneself diagnose? And when you
Well,
reach the next point, are you like just turned into like just poof, you're gone? I mean, what happens?
well, I plead the fifth.
Okay.
I'm not going to sit here and tell you where I think I'm at,
Right.
right?
Okay.
That's, you know, uh, it's just not necessary.
Okay.
And look, it's not a diminishment of you, it's an expansion of you. It's not a diminishment of your limited identity, it's the expansion into unlimited identity. I still have a body. I still do this. I still have responsibilities. I still walk and talk. I still do the dishes, right? But your own sense of identity has expanded. People talk about it being free from the ego. Well, that's true. The ego never dies, and we don't have to exactly free ourselves from the ego. We have to become bigger than the ego. We have to recognize we're not limited to being our ego, to being our thoughts, to being
Mm-hmm.
our body,
Mm-hmm.
right? That those are limited and dimensions of ourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
That fourth path is called Anupaya. It means no path. It
Mm-hmm.
means a person with that descent of grace is so powerful that they just realize themselves as God, right?
Mm-hmm.
And our sadhana, those upayas, is the process of once that descent of grace happens, depending on the intensity of that descent, then we may have to make some effort. We may have to really learn to deal with the Shakti. We come to live in awareness, but it's all the pathway, the continuum towards the direct absolute experience that we are that same consciousness.
Mm. So I guess I'm wondering. So I've talked to some people who have been on different spiritual paths, not necessarily the one that you're on, but they
Right.
say that there's just this constant evolvement. Like I talked to Joseph Goldstein, who has been a deep study and student of Buddhism, and I said, "Are you enlightened?" And he's like, "I'm enlightening. Like I am." Lightening every single time, I'm
Right.
lightening up.
Nice. Yeah.
There's never like an end point. There's just this constantly lightening, 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 lightening. So there's not this point that you're like you're done. There's this always this constant
I won't
unfolding.
argue with that.
Yeah, and
Right.
and that's what I was wondering. So when you reach that, there is never a point where you aren't unfolding because consciousness is vast and infinite. So it seems like you would therefore be infinite. There would never be a point. There may be stages that are articulated in the model that you're talking about, but isn't it true that you're just if the universe is infinite, then you are infinite. Therefore, you're constantly evolving. Did I get it wrong?
Yes.
I don't.
No, no, that's you. That's a fine way to understand that, right? Isn't won't don't we find out that the universe, just this our own universe, our own universe is constantly expanding. Well, that
Right.
one universe is a size of a pinhead in the totality of God's consciousness.
Right. So
So
that therefore
they're
you,
all
even as
expanding.
God, even if you have reached, let's say that you've reached, I don't know what stage you're in,
But
and I understand it's
here's the thing.
inconsequential.
Here's maybe this will help you. So one of the names that you can see in the non-dual tradition is called Bhairava.
Hmm.
Bhairava knows he's God. He's that Shiva. I know myself as all things. I know myself as CJ. I know myself as Nathaji. I know myself as the telephone pole down the street. I know myself as all things, right? How could there be any more expansion than that? If I already know myself as all things, then all things are me, right? So what happens is our own individuated consciousness expands to that experience.
I see. Got it. Okay, got it.
God is ever present, ever full. If you want to say ever expanding, that's fine because there's no time and there's no space, right? But that full consciousness, absolute, pure, autonomous consciousness is and doesn't expand or decrease. It's just there.
Right.
It is
Okay.
the field of all existence.
Okay, so there isn't like an end point necessarily, but there's the end point of your recognition that goes, aha, like what else am
No,
I to like have it more insight? I have like the ultimate insight, which is I am
right.
all of this. And as the world expands and as things are expanding, I'm expanding with it too. I just have that wisdom and knowledge on the,
Yeah, but yeah, so that's okay, and you can think of it as that there is an endpoint to our our experience of separation. There is an endpoint to our limited identity,
hmm
right?
hmm
Once we become God, we've got Federer's forehand and backhand, then we're a master, right?
I relish a day when you get on the tennis court and you're like, I am God on the tennis court.
Right.
This has been so wonderful. Thank you for your
Deeply my
time.
pleasure to be here with you,
Yeah,
C.
and so it's theheartofconsciousness.com
.org.
.org.
Yeah.
And so you're going to be doing, you have a series of classes that you actually teach in Berkeley. How do people get connected? And you have a bunch of different books. How,
Well, yeah, I mean, the best way is to go to the website. I teach in Berkeley 3 nights a week. I do 3 immersions or retreats in Berkeley, during the year. I do a month-long immersion in Hawaii. I'm about to start a full 1 year program where I'll be teaching every other Monday night, talking about this matrix of sadhana and these upayas, etc. And those can be accessed through live streaming, through audio recordings, etc. I have 5 books that are on the website, and we have a few satellite centers around, etc. So the best place is to go to the heartofconsciousness.org or heartofsea.org website, either one, and that people can better understand. And I guess I'll be in Seattle in May, so
yes,
anybody in
you
your
will.
area can see us there. Yeah,
Excellent. Thank you so much.
my pleasure.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show. Would love your support in any way by giving me comments below or to subscribe to the show or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.